Jacob Green decided to be a surgeon of his own free will and worked very hard to make it happen. Even back in high school, he already dreamed of becoming a doctor. However, the boy wasn't looking to become a surgeon specifically. But when he got older, Jacob realized that surgery was what he actually wanted to do, since it was considered one of the most prestigious medical specialties. Having gotten into med school, the purposeful young man proved that hard work and determination could help achieve any goals. Since Jacob was born and raised in a small town in northern Maine, he was dead set on attending university in New York. Of course, the young man understood that it wouldn't be easy to get settled in such a big city. He had no relatives in New York. Jacob's parents didn't even have any friends or connections in the city. Therefore, the young man was all on his own in the truest sense. Since life on campus was very eventful, Jacob didn't really have time to feel lonely or bored. The small-town young man quickly made many friends, but there was one friend he singled out, Bill Patterson. Jacob had always valued true friendship, and therefore, he tried to keep it the way that it was at the very beginning. Jacob didn't have a hard time keeping up with the schoolwork. It was most likely due to his craving for knowledge and respect for his future profession. But when Jacob passed his finals and graduated from the university, he faced the first problems in his life. They were primarily caused by the pressing need to decide on his place of work. Of course, Jacob wanted to settle in New York and build his life in this wonderful city. But that wasn't all that easy to do, especially for a young man from a small town. In a way, it became Jacob's #1 goal in life. Meanwhile, having been born and raised in New York, Bill didn't face the same kind of issues. Therefore, even though he tried to support his friend, he really couldn't understand his problems and thus didn't get too involved in them. It's hard to imagine how Jacob's life would have turned out if he hadn't met Catherine Miller at that turning point. They met accidentally at one of the student parties Jacob attended. The young man was sitting alone, sipping a cocktail with a bored, lazy look when a particular blonde approached him. "Wouldn't you rather ask me to dance than sit here all by yourself?" the stranger said and smiled at the young man. Jacob was completely caught off guard, but he couldn't say no to the beautiful young woman, and soon they were hitting it off on the dance floor in a dance that seemed like a mix of rumba and salsa. The young woman who approached Jacob so boldly was Catherine Miller. In an unexpected twist, she was the daughter of the chief physician of the hospital located at the heart of New York. Jacob was modest by nature and didn't immediately realize that he could use this fact to his own advantage, thus helping advance his career. However, Bill was sharp enough to see that, and so the very next morning, he tried to get his friend to realize the potential benefits of such a relationship. You have to understand that being friends with her could help you get your career going, man. It wouldn't cost her dad a thing to get you a job at his clinic. You'll get experience, your own patients, and a decent income, of course. Bill tried to make his friend see what he thought was obvious. "Come on, she's just a regular young woman," Jacob objected at first. The truth was that he didn't even know that Catherine had a crush on him. She was rather spoiled and felt that she could do whatever she wanted. Thanks to his position, her father, Francis Miller, was very well off, and therefore he never spared any money on his daughter and always showered her with gifts. As a result, Catherine grew up spoiled and rather obnoxious. She spent her life in nightclubs, restaurants, and beauty salons. She threw her father's money left and right, never stopping for a second to think how hard he had to work to earn it. It just so happened that she liked Jacob at first sight. According to Catherine, there was something special about him, something that people from big cities didn't have. At first, Jacob tried to avoid any kind of relationship with Catherine and thought of her attention as something fleeting and fickle. But the young woman had her own take on the matter. The fact was that whenever Catherine decided that she wanted something, she always got it, no matter the cost. Thus, in order to get closer to Jacob, the young woman used Bill, who actually volunteered to help her out of the kindness of his heart. Deep down, Bill wanted his friend to be able to settle down in New York and achieve everything he'd been striving of since childhood. Therefore, Bill honestly believed that Jacob simply couldn't afford to miss such an incredible opportunity. It was Bill who started deliberately bringing Jacob and Catherine together, taking it upon himself to set up their encounters and dates. Inadvertently, Jacob grew attached to Catherine, who was ready to openly declare her love for him. To prove that her intentions were serious, the young woman invited Jacob home so that he could meet her parents. Jacob's first instinct was to refuse. Being from a poor family, he didn't know how to behave around wealthy people who could afford pretty much anything in their lives. The young man tried to imagine how the introduction would go, and quite expectedly felt very anxious about it. Jacob felt that it would be nothing short of a royal reception, attending which required knowledge of some special rules of etiquette, at the very least. But in fact, Catherine's parents turned out to be rather nice. Francis Miller was also a doctor. He actually used to work as a surgeon at one point. Amanda Miller had nothing to do with the medical profession. She chose to dedicate her life to the law instead. And only Catherine still didn't know what she wanted to do with her life. One day, she wanted to be a designer. The next day, a manager in a trading company. And the day after that, a skydiving instructor. It was probably due to the fact that Catherine had no incentive to work, since her parents could provide her with anything she wanted. Therefore, having set her eyes on Jacob, she decided to help him succeed instead. Catherine felt that with the support of her father, the young man would definitely thrive and that he could eventually be even more successful than her father. Being a smart man, Mr. Miller immediately figured out his daughter's plan, but didn't fight them. Actually, he didn't see a problem with helping his daughter's boyfriend get a job. To Jacob's surprise, the issue of his transfer to Mr. Miller's hospital was settled that very evening. "Thank you, sir. Mr. Miller, I promise I won't let you down," the young man said, shaking with excitement. Mr. Miller smiled contently and patted the young man on the shoulder. "I know that you won't let me down, but if you do, you won't get a second chance," the man added. Jacob felt as if he'd gotten into some kind of a fairy tale, where his every wish came true as if by magic. If only the young man could have known how wrong he was. The first day at Catherine's father's hospital was surprisingly easy. The other staff treated the young surgeon with understanding and quickly brought him up to speed. Of course, no one gave Jacob any serious assignments at first, and thus didn't let the man prove himself. The impressive salary inspired the young man and gave him confidence in his future, so he tried not to think too much about the fact that he wasn't really getting to practice medicine or improve his skills. Meanwhile, Catherine worked on getting him married to her. The young woman's parents had nothing against it, but Jacob clearly would have preferred to put it off for another year or two. The young man wanted to first make sure that his career had taken off and have financial stability in life. Meanwhile, Jacob felt that he owed everything in his life to Francis Miller, who kept his son-in-law under his strict control. Of course, the head physician didn't show it. On the contrary, he made sure to emphasize how much he approved of Jacob. But the truth was, Mr. Miller didn't allow his future son-in-law any freedom and wanted to keep him on a short leash at all times. Meanwhile, Catherine was incredibly happy that she would soon become Jacob's wife. At the same time, the small-town young man felt more and more embarrassed by the fact that his fiance didn't always behave appropriately and often did things that Jacob definitely didn't approve of. What concerned Jacob the most was Catherine's drinking habits. He felt that she drank way too much alcohol. Of course, she wasn't an alcoholic per se, but she went clubbing almost every night. She drank, had a real blast, and returned home in the morning. "Honey, why are you getting mad? I want to have some fun before the wedding. It's not like I'd be able to do it afterwards. I'll have a family, a home, and a job. I won't have any time to think about myself," Catherine said. Jacob wanted to meet his wife halfway, so he chose not to dwell on it. However, as time passed, Jacob grew more and more worried about his upcoming nuptials. Nevertheless, there was no going back for Jacob, because he literally had nowhere to go. The young man was well aware that if he were to break off things with Catherine, he'd lose not only his job, but also the support of his influential patron, Catherine's father. Bill Patterson also played an important role in Jacob's decision. His friend strongly insisted that Jacob be patient and keep the relationship going. You know how they say, it doesn't always have to be love at first sight. I'm sure you'll grow to love Catherine eventually, man. Trust me, everything will work out, and you'll think back to these years with a smile, the young man said. The wedding was held at one of the best restaurants in the city. The celebration was so grand that it even surprised the most sophisticated residents of the metropolis. Posing in front of the cameras, Catherine was on cloud 9. Jacob, on the other hand, kept worrying that he was making a huge mistake. 3 years flew by. A lot had changed in the lives of the newlyweds at this time. Catherine got pregnant and gave birth to Jacob's beautiful son named Simon. To the delight of his parents, Simon was growing up a smart kid, developed beyond his years. Jacob slowly strengthened his position at the hospital, although he still wasn't allowed to take the lead on any cases. Francis Miller strictly followed his plan and was determined to make an errand boy out of Jacob. The man wanted to manipulate his son-in-law in order to break his will and make sure that he was ready to do anything his father-in-law told him. Jacob might have been able to accept such a role if it weren't for Catherine's behavior, who only became even more obnoxious after the birth of their son. Catherine often left little Simon with Jacob, got behind the wheel of her car, and went to a nightclub where she felt that she could rest from the mundane family life. It certainly was wrong, but Jacob still tried to put up with his wife's unseemly behavior at first. Once, Catherine came home in the morning, which was the last straw for Jacob. The man got mad and started a fight. As expected, Francis Miller immediately joined in and gave his son-in-law a piece of his mind. Only then did Jacob realize that he was being held in a golden cage and that no one was planning on setting him free anytime soon. Meanwhile, Catherine continued to live her life as she pleased. At some point, Jacob even started suspecting that she was cheating on him, but since he had no proof, he couldn't do anything about it. Especially since Francis Miller doted on his daughter and didn't allow even the thought that she could be doing something wrong. Trying to distract himself, Jacob threw himself into work. Unfortunately, his plans failed miserably. It wasn't because Jacob lacked qualifications or skills, but simply because he was never trusted with anything serious. However, the last straw for Jacob was when Catherine had the audacity to bring her lover into their home. Despite the fact that the woman introduced him as her colleague, Jacob immediately understood what was going on. Having decided to break all ties with Catherine, the man immediately filed for divorce, which quite expectedly set off a chain reaction that cost him his job and his reputation. Unfortunately, Francis Miller was very sophisticated in his revenge. Instead of simply firing his son-in-law, he set him up, letting him perform a surgery that was doomed to fail, thus ruining the young man's reputation. The devious head physician knew that Jacob's patient only had a 5% chance of survival, and he also knew that in case of the patient's death, the leading surgeon would be blamed for it. Thus, Jacob was kicked out of the clinic with a heavy blow to his reputation. You can forget about New York now. I made sure that you won't even get a job as a vet's assistant, Francis Miller said in parting. As expected, Catherine refused to share custody of their son and had a court order issued to keep Jacob away. Thus, the disgraced surgeon had to return to his hometown, where his parents and friends were already waiting for him. They knew that life was full of unexpected twists and were kind enough to refrain from asking the man any uncomfortable questions. Jacob got a job at a local hospital, which seemed very small compared to the one he worked at in New York. On the other hand, Jacob had the opportunity to actually operate, which helped him improve his skills and gain experience. Later, the young surgeon met a nurse named Sarah Johnson. A passionate relationship quickly developed between the young people. Unlike Catherine, the young woman loved Jacob with all of her heart and wanted to spend the rest of her life with him. Thus, the young surgeon got married a second time. What worried Jacob the most, however, was that he only got to see Simon a couple of times in all of that time. Several years had passed. By this time, Jacob had gained a lot of experience and become the best surgeon in the area. One day, a little girl was brought to his clinic. She'd injured her leg when she fell from her bicycle. Since the cut was very deep, the girl needed stitches. The surgeon stitched up the cut beautifully, making sure that the girl wouldn't be left with the scar. However, this wasn't what surprised Jacob. During the procedure, the girl, Molly, sang a strange song about a girl in a magical land. The song was so unreal that its words stuck in Jacob's mind forever. Wishing to thank the surgeon, Molly's mother offered him money. "No, ma'am, you definitely shouldn't pay me. It's my job. I get a salary for it," Jacob answered. This amazing story could have probably ended at this point if Francis Miller hadn't shown up to see Jacob. For some reason, the man didn't seem nearly as handsome and well-groomed as he used to be. He looked haggard and much older. But when Jacob saw Simon in the back seat of his father-in-law's car, he got worried. "What happened?" Jacob said, feeling that something was wrong. Francis Miller hesitated for a moment, but then he told Jacob that Catherine had died in a car accident. As it turned out, Catherine had too much to drink on that fateful day, but she got behind the wheel anyway. The worst part about it was that she crashed into another car and thus injured another person who ended up disabled. This incident caused backlash from the public, which led to the fact that Mr. Miller was removed from his post as chief physician and fired from the hospital. Catherine's mother also lost her job, which left the Miller family without their usual level of income. "So I'm here to ask that you take Simon," Francis said, lowering his eyes guiltily. Of course, Jacob didn't want to gloat and say that what happened to his ex-wife was long in coming. Instead, he picked Simon up and carried him inside the house. That day, he had a heart-to-heart talk with his ex-father-in-law for the first time ever. Having lost his wealth and influence, Francis Miller turned out to be a pleasant man who now knew to appreciate life's sense of irony and could no longer boast of his wealth. Sarah gladly accepted Simon, since she always knew about his existence. At first, Simon behaved like a hunted wolf pup, having lived too long with his alcoholic mother and grown used to her drunken outbursts. But then, feeling the love and affection of his father and Sarah, he even started calling Sarah his mom. Time flew by. Thanks to his dedication and professionalism, Jacob became the head physician of the clinic, which he brought to a whole new level during his time there. Getting a consult with him was considered a great luck, and his fame as a talented surgeon spread far beyond the state. Then a real miracle happened in Jacob's life. Sarah got pregnant and gave birth to a beautiful baby, Nancy. By that time, Simon had already graduated from high school and was in his junior year of med school. The young man wanted to follow in his father's footsteps and become a surgeon in order to save people. He wanted to be a hero in a white coat. Since Simon inherited the best features of his parents, he was very, very handsome. As is often in this case, Jacob and Sarah were the last ones to know about their son's engagement. The young man successfully hid his relationship from them for a long time, so as to not worry them before he made sure that it was serious. Needless to say, Jacob and Sarah were incredibly happy to finally get to meet their son's fiance. Her name was Molly. Jacob liked the young woman the moment she stepped foot into his house. Sarah cooked a celebratory dinner on the occasion of their introduction. When they started eating, everyone praised Sarah's cooking. At that moment, Nancy woke up and filled the house with the sound of her crying. Since Molly was sitting closest to the exit, she quickly got up from the table and went to get the baby. Having picked Nancy up, she started humming the words of a simple song. Jacob didn't pay any attention to it at first, but when the surgeon realized that the song was about a girl who was in a magical land, he felt uneasy. At that moment, Jacob remembered the girl whom he had treated 15 years ago, the one who hurt her leg when she fell from her bicycle. Only then did he realize that his son's wife was most likely the girl that he'd treated a long, long time ago. "Molly, is that you? Back then at the hospital, do you remember?" Jacob asked with tears in his eyes. The young woman looked at her future father-in-law with surprise, after which she said, "Yes, you're right." Soon, Jacob shared the story of how he inadvertently saved his son's fiance when she was little. Looking at the couple's beaming faces, it was obvious that their family life would be very happy and last for many, many years. After all, a relationship built on honesty and mutual respect is bound to succeed, and even if they do face problems, they will surely deal with them together.